The opulence of Lagos's Ikoyi district hides its darkest secrets well, and none are darker than the silent siege within the Adewale penthouse. This is the stage for an explosive 10-chapter chronicle of forbidden love, ruthless power, and a meticulously plotted escape. Meet Kaine, the billionaire's bodyguard, a man whose loyalty is sworn to the estate, but whose soul belongs to the woman he is forbidden to touch. Meet Eleanor, the billionaire's wife, whose life is a masterpiece of deception, hiding years of abuse beneath designer fabrics and a brittle smile. And meet Michael, the billionaire himself, a shipping magnate whose empire is built on calculated cruelty. As the suffocating air of their gilded cage tightens, watch for the inevitable. You can expect a dramatic descent into obsession and betrayal, detailed with startling discoveries and sharp, agonizing twists leading to a desperate, high-stakes flight from Nigeria's most dangerous man. The silence is about to break, and the resulting echo will reveal who truly holds the power. Kaine's days were a monotonous rhythm of security sweeps and watchful waiting. From the panoramic windows of the Adewale estate, the vibrant chaos of Lagos was muted. A distant hum, kept at bay by triple-glazed armor plating and towering perimeter walls. The interior space, a sprawling temple of imported Italian stone and rare African hardwoods, was less a home and more a high-tech mausoleum. The silence was heavy, broken only by the sharp, decisive footfalls of Michael or the barely audible rustle of Eleanor's silk garments as she moved like a ghost through the vast halls. Kaine, an observer by trade, felt the corrosive effects of Michael's control on the atmosphere. Michael communicated his dominance not with shouts, but with calculated absences, leaving Eleanor alone in cavernous rooms for hours, or with a chilling indifference that made her existence seem meaningless. Worse were the moments of physical assertion, the brutal, casual placement of his hand on her shoulder, never a strike, but a touch that conveyed absolute ownership and the chilling promise of future threats. Kaine logged every interaction, not on his official reports, but in the indelible record of his memory, the ledger of injustice that he carried in his chest. His professional training warred constantly with a fierce mounting indignation. Eleanor's only sanctuary was the immense, climate-controlled library. She would retreat there, her slender fingers tracing the gold-leaf spines of untouched first editions, seeking solace in narratives far removed from her own inescapable reality. Kaine often found her by the window, gazing out at the distant, sparkling chaos of the city she could not enter, her expression a study in contained grief. The diamond jewelry Michael forced her to wear massive, brilliant pieces only emphasized her captivity, catching the light like glints of polished steel. The billionaire's wife was a trophy, polished daily, but suffocating beneath the weight of her value. Kaine realized his burgeoning love was not a soft emotion, but a hard, dangerous resolve forged in the heat of his pity and respect for her quiet endurance. He was the only person alive who saw the warrior beneath the resignation. The bond between Kaine and the billionaire's wife developed in the liminal spaces, the shared moment over a malfunctioning lock on the vault door, the fleeting exchange of glances in the rear-view mirror of the armored Rolls-Royce during the long drives to the Lecky office, the simultaneous realization of a security flaw in the main gate during a routine drill. These were nonverbal conversations, thick with shared meaning and increasing danger. She saw the quiet fire in his eyes, a reflection of the strength she desperately needed. He saw the flicker of resilience beneath her trauma, a promise of the powerful woman she could be once free. The professional barrier was eroding under the relentless pressure of proximity and shared indignation against the billionaire's cruelty, creating a pact understood purely in the language of the body and the eyes. One rain-swept afternoon, while performing an unscheduled communications audit on the security hub's backup servers, Kaine stumbled upon a hidden electronic trail. Deep within Michael's most protected, encrypted data storage, hidden behind several layers of false partitioning. He found files labeled with Eleanor's maiden name, Project Lyra. The discovery was not of a mistress or a financial fraud, but something far colder and more sinister. A detailed playbook spanning nearly a decade. Michael had systematically and ruthlessly dismantled Eleanor's family's prosperous import-export business years before they met, orchestrating a series of strategic legal and financial assaults that led to bankruptcy. He had then positioned himself as the savior who offered to clear the family debt in exchange for Eleanor's hand in marriage. Eleanor was not just an abused wife. She was a victim of a calculated corporate and personal ambush, her imprisonment predating the wedding vows. The full horror of the billionaire's cold, systematic malice crystallized in Kaine's mind. This was not the act of a jealous, petty tyrant. It was the meticulous execution of a predator. Kaine's oath was shattered. His role was no longer just security for a client. It was a mandate for justice, a desperate fight against the man who had bought a soul and locked it away. This overwhelming discovery fueled a desperate urgency that transcended mere romance. Kaine, unable to speak or write his intentions, began subtle, dangerous tests. He left specific, easily missed articles concerning complex corporate law and familial inheritance on the library table, placing them conspicuously near a worn bookmark. He rearranged the books in the security code sequence, a specific series of numbers that only the security team and Michael were supposed to know. Eleanor, with the sharp intuition of the constantly threatened, recognized the signals instantly. She found the articles, memorized the case law, and returned the books to their original order, a silent acknowledgement of the new, terrifying partnership. They were conspirators now, moving in a world where a misplaced gesture was a death sentence. The annual charity gala at the Eco Convention Center was a glittering, suffocating event. It required demonstration of the Adewale dynasty's untouchable power. Michael, radiating entitlement and control, used Eleanor as a central trophy, forcing her into painful, protracted interactions with his rivals and associates. Kaine, positioned strategically on the perimeter, was a shield and a silent witness to her agony. As the relentless flashes of cameras illuminated the blinding diamond choker around Eleanor's neck, a gift that felt more like a shackle, Kaine observed the slight, constant tremor in her hands, a manifestation of her internal terror. In a crowded room of hundreds, the billionaire's wife was utterly alone, save for his unwavering, purposeful presence. The climax arrived mid-evening. A sudden, massive power surge, likely intentional sabotage from a rival, plunged the ballroom into a disorienting near darkness, the emergency lights taking a moment too long to engage. In the ensuing panic, Michael, focused solely on protecting his public image and his watch, shoved Eleanor roughly aside to ensure his own swift exit toward the central pillar of light. In that critical half-second of true darkness, Kaine, moving with the preternatural speed of instinct honed by military service, reached her side. He didn't touch her, but his massive shadow fell over her, a momentary, protective sanctuary that separated her from the chaos. As the lights flickered back on, Eleanor's expression, caught between profound fear and raw gratitude, was a silent, desperate plea for salvation. Kaine met it with a look of absolute, committed intent, a vow sealed by the adrenaline of the near disaster. The professional distance between the billionaire's wife and the billionaire's bodyguard had dissolved forever, replaced by a mutual, desperate reliance. The billionaire was not blind to the subtle shift in the gravitational field of his house. Michael noticed the new stillness in his wife, the subtle, defiant straightening of her spine. He noticed the unwavering, proprietary focus of his bodyguard, Kaine, a gaze that had moved past professional duty into something possessive. Michael's suspicion was refined by years of cutting ruthlessness, and he began his counter-surveillance immediately. He began to isolate them, assigning Kaine to remote surveillance posts on the mainland, scheduling late-night business trips, and doubling the unseen surveillance within the estate's private quarters. The air pressure in the house became unbearable. The ultimate test came on a late Friday night, hours after a staged minor gas leak drill. Michael had secretly arranged a staged security breach, a minor incident designed to gauge Kaine's reaction time and, more importantly, the nature of his protective instincts. An alarm blared on the ground floor, indicating forced entry through a rarely used service door. Kaine moved, but not immediately to the source, as protocol demanded. He moved first, with a calculated delay of exactly 2 seconds, towards the third-floor master suite, where Eleanor was supposedly sleeping. He paused at the doorway, his back to the room, scanning the hall for threats before moving to neutralize the breach. That subtle priority shift Eleanor's safety over the estate's property was a clear answer to the billionaire's unseen question. Michael, watching via a remote encrypted feed from his office desk, simply smiled, a cold, predatory curve of the lips. The test had been failed, and Kaine, the billionaire's bodyguard, had just sealed his own execution order. Kaine understood that Michael's smile meant the window for passive resistance had closed. The time for communication by code was over. Action was required. The escape plan, communicated entirely through objects and routine deviations, became their lifeline. Kaine adjusted the daily security code from a familiar, predictable pattern to a date Eleanor's deceased mother's birthday, a number Michael would never consider. Eleanor, in turn, started requesting unusual books from the library ancient maps of the old Lagos mainland and the coastal routes, claiming they were for an obscure historical society donation. Their silent plotting was a masterpiece of constrained communication, each movement fraught with the risk of surveillance. Kaine subtly left blueprints detailing the estate's forgotten infrastructure near the laundry service's door. Eleanor found them, studied them, and left behind a single foreign coin on Kaine's service tray, indicating their destination. The adjacent small nation Michael had not yet contaminated with his influence. They mapped a path through the labyrinthine, sweltering underbelly of the Adewale estate, focusing on an antiquated service tunnel near the lagoon that was rarely used and poorly monitored, relying on Kaine's knowledge of the compound's decay. The final signal was a small brass elephant figurine on Eleanor's bedside table, a meaningless trinket she had often toyed with. If it was turned to face the window, the plan was on for the next scheduled breach. If it faced the door, the mission was aborted due to Michael's presence. For 3 agonizing days, the elephant remained static, facing the door. On the 4th morning, Kaine noticed it had been shifted. The elephant now stared fixedly at the glittering waters beyond the window. The time had come. The night arrived, thick with the smell of the Atlantic, diesel from the docks of Apapa, and the metallic scent of an impending storm. Michael was hosting a closed-door, high-stakes negotiation in the isolated west wing of the estate, a distraction Kaine had orchestrated by leaking false intelligence. Kaine, scheduled to guard the main entrance, instead disabled the interior surveillance feed for precisely 15 minutes, the absolute maximum time he could manage before the system flagged a hard error. He moved like a shadow through the silent corridors, his footsteps swallowed by the deep pile carpets, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against the weight of his responsibility. Eleanor was waiting in the darkened library, having dressed herself in plain, practical clothes beneath a borrowed, oversized coat. Her face was a mask of cold, resolute fear, her eyes wide and luminous in the gloom. Kaine entered, moving not toward her, but toward the wall panel concealed behind a massive antique tapestry. With swift, practiced movements, he opened the panel, revealing the rusted, narrow entrance to the unused service elevator shaft that descended into the tunnel system. She moved first, without hesitation, trusting his presence completely. Kaine followed, sealing the door behind them, plunging them into absolute, suffocating darkness. The tunnel was cramped, a claustrophobic hell of concrete and stagnant water. The only sound was the echo of their labored breathing, the scraping of their clothes on the rough walls, and the distant, rhythmic thud of the generator, a sound that reminded them of the life they were leaving behind. They scrambled through the suffocating heat, moving towards the mouth of the lagoon, driven by the urgency of the ticking clock. The silence of the night was suddenly shattered by the distant, high-pitched sound of security personnel moving through the house. Yelling through their communicators, Michael had discovered the breach just 5 minutes into the shutdown. They ran faster, ignoring the cuts and bruises, the scent of brackish water growing stronger, the knowledge of imminent discovery driving them into a desperate, final sprint. They burst out of the tunnel mouth onto a hidden sandy shore littered with mangrove roots and tangled vegetation. A small, nondescript speedboat waited nearby, procured weeks ago by Kaine through his few remaining loyal contacts who asked no questions. As Eleanor stepped into the boat, her face was alight with the first genuine spark of freedom Kaine had ever witnessed, a sight that momentarily eclipsed the pounding urgency of their escape. She paused on the threshold of their liberty. Her eyes, no longer shadowed by fear, held a new chilling clarity, the look of a predator finally ready to strike. She reached into the inner lining of the coat and withdrew a small, flat, waterproof packet. It was not jewelry or cash, as Kaine had expected, but a signed, sealed document, an undeniable, legally binding confession from a former associate of Michael's, detailing the entirety of the corporate fraud, the systematic ruin of Eleanor's family business, and the intentional manipulation of stock prices. This was not an escape route. It was a weapon for the billionaire's ultimate destruction. Kaine's security audit had only skimmed the surface. Eleanor had been gathering this evidence for years, surviving the abuse, playing the part of the frail victim, while waiting for the perfect moment and the perfect shield. He realized, with a stunning, profound force, that his devotion had been the necessary catalyst, but her meticulous, cold-blooded planning had been the engine of this liberation. She had used his love, his access, and his formidable skills to secure not just her freedom, but the absolute, systemic downfall of Michael Adewale. The stunning discovery did not diminish the love, but rather elevated it, transforming it from romantic devotion into a profound respect for her strategic brilliance and terrifying strength. Kaine, the billionaire's bodyguard, had fallen for a strategist, a survivor who had silently plotted her revenge from the deepest, darkest part of her gilded cage. The speedboat roared to life, its engine a defiance against the silent, suffocating wealth of Lagos. It cut across the dark waters of the Gulf of Guinea, leaving the distant, glittering skyline, the billionaire's domain, shrinking behind them. The thunderous sound of the engine was the deafening sound of their new, precarious liberty. Kaine steered the boat, his knuckles white on the throttle, the vast, unforgiving ocean ahead, his every muscle tensed for the inevitable pursuit. Eleanor sat beside him, the small, damning document tucked safely inside her garment, a promise of retribution. The billionaire's wife was free, but now a fugitive, allied with her former captor's protector, sailing toward an uncertain future. They were exposed, hunted by a man who treated failure as a personal insult. Michael, already raging in his opulent manner, would unleash the full, terrifying might of his influence across the continent, his resources limitless, his vengeance certain. Yet, as the sun began to paint the horizon in fierce reds and golds, a visual echo of the volatile love between them, Kaine glanced at Eleanor. Her gaze met his, not with gratitude, but with the quiet, hard-won courage of someone who had just risked everything and won the first round against an empire. The silent covenant between them was sealed by the salt spray and the roar of the engine. a testament to the dramatic, undeniable truth that freedom, like love, sometimes requires a final devastating act of betrayal.